What's up everyone, this is Coindog here with another GTA video. So in this video we're going back to my head-to-head series, and this week I've got for you the Sterling GT versus the Infernus Classic. So this is a pairing that you guys requested quite a lot back on the Turismo Classic versus Infernus Classic video. So I figured this is the one that I put out for you at the moment, since the Sports Classic is quite a well-used class at the moment. So first up we've got the 2 mile drag, which is just it is literally a drag strip that's 2 miles long to test the acceleration and to some extent the top speed on these. Now interestingly, on the Sterling GT it hits top speed really early. I don't know whether it's got 1 gear less than other vehicles or something, but most cars on this track don't actually hit top speed till you get to just before or just after the last checkpoint, but this Sterling GT hit it a lot earlier than that. And this test is really interesting because you can see straight away the Infernus is a long way ahead of the Sterling GT, and this really does illustrate how all these other YouTubers that just do drag races and base their opinions on cars based on that are talking rubbish, and you'll see what I mean when we get further on into the video. So for the actual difference in time was 2 seconds between the two, which is a huge difference. You know, when I first did this I thought, you know, there was clearly not going to be any competition between them, but that perhaps wasn't the case, as you'll see when we get in. So next we've got test 2, which is bridging the gap. Now this is mainly a bumpy street circuit with mainly low speed corners. Now the big thing that I would say about the Sterling GT is this is obviously a bumpy circuit, but the Sterling GT, it's just like the bumps aren't even there. It can just get on the power so early, it's so planted over the bumps, which is really strange, to be honest. There's not many cars at all that I've driven, even the top supercars, that handle bumps like this thing does. That section just back there with the chicane, it goes through it really well. You can get on the power so much earlier than you can with the Infernus. And just everywhere on this track it just really felt a really nice car to drive, to be honest. The big deficit that we saw in the last test on the acceleration, the top speed, is only really applicable to this section here, because apart from that you've got a lot of, you know, short straights into slow speed corners and stuff like that, so it doesn't affect it quite as much. And the fact that it can get on the power so much earlier than the Infernus, you know, it does make some of that time back up. And even this last corner here that we're coming up to, so this car is probably the one of only 3 cars I've tested that can go completely flat through that corner. The others being, I think, the Nero Custom did it and the RE7B. So it was pretty interesting, to be honest. And then we've got the Infernus Classic, which, as I've tested before around this circuit, so, you know, if anyone's not watched that video before, I'll just recap over how it handles. So as I mentioned on the last video, this is a very difficult car to drive quick. It's quite, you have to be very delicate and gentle with the stick to manoeuvre it around the corners without the back end slipping around, because it is quite, it's got quite a snappy back end in terms of the way it goes. It's not like a progressive loss of grip, it just kind of just goes all of a sudden, and once it starts to spin round you can't really recover it, to be honest, whereas it wasn't like that with the Sterling GT. And, you know, it has got that much better acceleration and a much better top speed than the Sterling GT, which does help it, you know, around some of these sections, but the fact is it doesn't handle the bumps very well, and it also it just slides around a lot more and all that sort of stuff. You can't get on the power as early out of the corners as you can with the Sterling, and that is reflected in the lap time, to be honest. And it just shows how that one test that we did at the start on the drag strip is just, it's almost irrelevant in a lot of cases, to be honest. So the actual outcome of that test is that the Sterling GT was about 0.4 of a second quicker than the Infernus. That is purely down to how it handles the bumps and how early you can get on the power. So test 3, which is docked points, so this is a smooth stunt piece circuit with mainly mid to high speed corners. So the big advantage that we've just discussed there with the Sterling GT having that that ability to just ride over bumps like they're not there and get on the power so early, it doesn't have that advantage anymore on this track, because there are no bumps of any note. You know, it is a completely flat circuit for the most part. And as a result of that, obviously the advantage it has is gone. The Infernus handles this track a lot better. The Sterling GT did handle it well, you know, there was no drama with it anywhere. I would say that particularly this section that we're coming up to here, the Sterling GT goes through this a lot better than the Infernus, because for the big thing about the Infernus on this sort of track, it doesn't like the curbs very much at all, and if you just clip the curb at the wrong angle with the Infernus, it does tend to spin out or lose the back end a little bit, whereas this just rides the curbs like they're not there, as it does with all the other bumps, which is, it's quite an unusual characteristic to have, to be honest. I'm not sure whether part of it's down to the off-road tyres that I use as part of the testing or not, or whether it's just a a better car, and it's quite unusual as well in terms of a sports classic car having good suspension, because you wouldn't expect that to be the case. Obviously classic cars generally are not known for having good suspension. And then the Infernus, so as I said, this is a car that is perfectly suited to this sort of circuit. There is no bumps to unsettle it or anything like that, and as a result of that, it is very, very quick around this track. Not as quick as the Turismo Classic, obviously, as we saw in the previous video, but it is you know, a good deal quicker than it was previously on the last test, and it is purely down to the fact that you can now get on the power early out of the corners. As I said, it doesn't go through this section as well as the Sterling GT. You do have to avoid those curves a little bit, which you didn't have to, but overall it can get on the power just as early as the Sterling can out of the corners. Then you've got this really long straight here, and the fact that it's all higher speed, it really does help based on the result we saw in test 1 of how much better the acceleration and the top speed is on this car. So it makes up that deficit that it had previously, and I would probably say that this is probably the most interesting test that I've done so far in terms of comparing cars and the results that have come out of it, from my perspective at least. So the overall result there, we've got about 6/10 of a second advantage there for the Infernus Classic. So you've seen the differences in the two different types of circuit that we've had there. So overall the Infernus does win. However, obviously the Turismo is so overpowered, but if you're in a race where the Turismo is banned and you can choose between the Infernus or the Sterling, if it's a bumpy circuit, I'd probably choose the Sterling GT, to be honest. If it's not, then choose the Infernus Classic. So that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you found it quite useful and interesting. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't done already, and I'll be back again soon.